The house smelled of cinnamon from the candle Megan had lit to create a cozy atmosphere for grading her students' papers. She loved these quiet evenings when she could immerse herself completely in her students' creative work. The clock in the living room struck 9, but there were still many ungraded essays on the influence of the Impressionists on contemporary art. Megan adjusted her reading glasses and rubbed her neck, where her mother's necklace rested, the only piece of jewelry she wore all the time. It was a delicate piece, an elegant white gold chain with small diamonds, not too expensive but infinitely dear to her heart. She was just making notes in the margins of her latest assignment when the front door burst open. There was a commotion in the hallway. Something fell. Megan sighed. She had learned to tell her husband's mood by the way he opened the door. "Meg, where are you?" Randall's voice sounded slurred. He stumbled into the living room, holding onto the wall. He smelled of whiskey and cigarettes, even though he had quit smoking 3 years ago. "I'm working, Randall," Megan replied calmly, without looking up from her papers. She had learned to remain calm when her husband came home in this state. "Working? All you do is work?" He smiled crookedly, coming closer. "Do we have any money? I need money now." "No money," Megan shook her head. "You know it's a week until payday, and we've already spent almost everything." Randall leaned against the table, towering over her. He was hot and smelled of alcohol. "There must be some. You always hide something," he began, rummaging through the desk drawers, scattering papers. "Stop it! You'll mess everything up." Megan tried to stop him, but he pushed her hand away. His gaze fell on the necklace. "What's this? Sitting here in gold and you say there's no money." "Don't you dare! It's my mother's!" But Randall was already reaching for the clasp. His fingers were clumsy from drinking, and he pulled too hard. The links dug into her neck before the clasp gave way. Megan cried out in pain and surprise. "I'm taking this to pay for your living expenses." He clenched the necklace in his fist. "Stop being a princess. It's time to pay your bills." Megan looked at her husband and didn't recognize him. Where was the smiling car dealer who had charmed her at a charity event 5 years ago? He had been so elegant in his dark blue suit, so handsome, giving her flowers and driving her around in his Mercedes to exhibitions. She had fallen in love with his enthusiasm, the way he talked about his work, his dreams of expanding the business. Now standing before her was a rumpled, dejected man in a stale shirt that reeked of alcohol. "Give it back," Megan said quietly but firmly, holding out her hand. "No way!" He shoved the necklace into his pocket. "We have to live somehow." "Randall, it's the last thing I have left of my mother. Please." Something in her voice made him hesitate. He looked at his wife with almost sober eyes but shook his head stubbornly. "We'll talk about it tomorrow," and headed for the stairs, staggering. Megan remained sitting at the table, surrounded by scattered student papers. A lump formed in her throat, and the marks from the torn necklace burned her neck. She absent-mindedly rubbed her neck, looking at the unproofread essay. The lines blurred before her eyes. 5 years ago, everything had been so different. She was teaching art history at a college when a friend invited her to a charity auction. Randall was selling one of his cars to benefit a children's hospice. He volunteered to show her his collection of rare cars in his showroom. Megan remembered how they walked among the polished cars, and he enthusiastically told her the history of each model. Back then, she couldn't have imagined that one day he would steal her jewelry to get money for booze, that his successful business would go bankrupt because of risky decisions and debts, that the cheerful, confident man would turn into an aggressive drunk. Megan slowly gathered her scattered papers. Tomorrow she would talk to him when he sobered up. But something told her that this conversation would not change anything. Megan lay in the guest bedroom, listening to her husband's heavy snoring through the wall. For the past few months, she had been spending more and more nights here, unable to stand the smell of alcohol and Randall's restless sleep. Her fingers kept reaching for her neck, where her mother's graduation gift, a necklace, usually lay. Now, her neck felt uncomfortably bare. The light from the street lamp filtered through the loosely drawn curtains, casting strange shadows on the wall. Megan remembered how her mother had fastened the necklace around her neck in front of the mirror on that June evening. "This is a special piece of jewelry, sweetheart," she said, adjusting her daughter's stray strand of hair. "My grandmother received it as a wedding gift, then passed it on to my mother, who gave it to me, and now it's yours." Her mother's thin fingers, already touched by arthritis, lovingly stroked the intertwined gold threads. 2 years later, her mother passed away, quickly and unexpectedly, taken by a stroke in a matter of days. The necklace became more than just a piece of jewelry to Megan. It was a living connection to her loved one. She absent-mindedly rubbed the spot on her neck where the metal had dug into her skin when Randall had ripped it off. The clock in the hallway struck 2. Megan rolled over onto her other side, but sleep would not come. Her thoughts returned again and again to how it all began to fall apart. Just a year ago, they had lived a completely different life. Not luxurious, but dignified. Randall had a thriving car dealership. They had plans for the future, and they were thinking about having a child. Then the problems with suppliers began. Randall started staying late at work and coming home sullen and irritable. Once she smelled alcohol on his breath, but he dismissed it, saying he had been meeting with partners and had to drink to maintain relations. Megan believed him, or wanted to believe him. Soon it became clear that things were really bad. The bank refused to give them a loan for development, and old debts began to pile up. Randall tried to save the business, but only sank deeper into financial trouble. He turned to the bottle more and more often, saying it helped him relax and think better. Megan remembered the evening when he came home unusually quiet and said that the salon was closing. She hugged him, assuring him that they would get through it and start over. But Randall was no longer the determined man he had been. He seemed broken, having lost his life's work. At first he tried to find a job, but each rejection pushed him deeper into depression, and the depression pushed him to the bottle. Their savings were dwindling. Megan took on extra hours at college, but her salary was barely enough to live on. And Randall, he came home drunk more and more often, demanding money and accusing her of not supporting him enough. The necklace. He had never touched her personal belongings before. This was a new, frightening development. Megan sat down on the bed and turned on the nightlight. In its dim glow, the room seemed strange and unwelcoming. She reached for the phone and hesitated. Calling her father in the middle of the night, what could be more childish and helpless? But she dialed the number, as if her hand had moved on its own. The ring sounded unexpectedly loud in the nighttime silence. On the fourth ring, a familiar voice, slightly hoarse from sleep, came on the line. "Megan? What's wrong?" "Dad?" She fell silent, not knowing how to explain everything that had happened, everything that had been happening for the past year. How could she tell him about the slow destruction of her family, about how the man she loved had turned into someone strange and frightening? "I'll be right there." Her father's voice took on a stern tone. "No, don't. It's too late." "Megan." Her father said her name the way he used to when she was a child and trying to hide something important. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. She didn't argue. She put down the phone and listened to the snoring coming from the wall. Everything would change in the morning. She could feel it. The sleepless night was coming to an end, and somewhere in the pre-dawn twilight, a decision was forming that she was still afraid to admit to herself. The morning was gray and damp. Megan had time to take a shower and make coffee before the doorbell rang. Randall was still asleep upstairs. After yesterday, he rarely woke up before noon. Harrison Brightwood stood on the porch, tall, fit, in a strict dark coat. Despite the early hour, he looked composed and determined. Megan involuntarily straightened her back. Her father always had that effect on her. "You look tired," he remarked as he entered the house. He smelled fresh and of expensive cologne, familiar scents from her childhood that Megan always associated with security and peace. They walked into the kitchen. Megan poured her father a cup of coffee. Black, no sugar, just the way he liked it. Harrison looked around, noting the details. Unwashed dishes in the sink, empty bottles that Randall hadn't bothered to hide, general clutter uncharacteristic of his neat daughter. "Tell me everything," he said quietly, sitting down at the kitchen table. Megan sat down opposite him, rubbing her neck mechanically, where there were faint marks left from the torn necklace. She began to tell him everything, slowly at first, then faster and faster, as if a dam had burst. She told him how Randall had gradually changed, about his breakdowns, about the missing money, about yesterday's incident with the necklace. Harrison listened silently, his jaw clenched. "Where's the necklace now?" he asked when she finished. "He has it. He said he'd take it to pay for my living expenses," Megan said with a bitter smile. "To pay for your living expenses," Harrison repeated slowly. "In the house I gave you for your wedding." Footsteps sounded upstairs, heavy, uneven. A minute later, Randall came down to the kitchen, rumpled and wearing a stale t-shirt. He froze in the doorway when he saw his father-in-law. "Good morning, Randall." Harrison's voice sounded deceptively soft. "We're just discussing your new methods of earning an income." Randall shifted his gaze from his wife to his father-in-law. "It's a family matter," he finally managed to say. "Exactly, a family matter. And I'm part of this family." Harrison stood up. "Where is my late wife's necklace?" "I don't," Randall began, but Harrison cut him off. "You seem to have forgotten who I am. Let me remind you. I was a federal judge for 20 years. I have enough connections to find out everything about your affairs, about your debts to bookmakers, your unpaid taxes, and the shady deals that ruined your business." Randall turned pale. He had never been interested in his father-in-law's past, content with the story of a successful retired lawyer. "The necklace," Harrison repeated. I'll sell it. I need the money." Randall tried to straighten up but slumped again under his father-in-law's heavy gaze. "All right." Harrison stood up. "I'll give you until tonight. Either the necklace is back with my daughter or we'll continue this conversation somewhere else. And believe me, you won't like that place." Randall remained silent, clenching his jaw tightly. "Megan, pack your things." Harrison turned to his daughter. "You can stay with me for now. Your room is always ready." Outside, rain began to fall, its drops tapping quietly on the glass. Megan mechanically touched her neck where the necklace should have been. She went upstairs to gather the essentials, leaving her father and husband alone in the oppressive silence of the kitchen. Her father's house greeted Megan with the familiar smell of leather bindings and coffee. Nothing had changed since she had lived there. The same austere mahogany furniture, the same law books on the shelves, the same perfect order in everything. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece had increased in number. Her father had continued to document his daughter's life even after she had married. Harrison led her into the study, the inner sanctum of the house, where she had only been allowed to enter on special occasions as a child. Megan sank into a deep leather armchair, noticing mechanically how it creaked exactly as it had 15 years ago. "You need to see this," her father said, taking a thick folder out of the safe. "I didn't want to show you before. I hoped I wouldn't have to." Megan looked at her father in confusion. "What is this?" "Information about your husband. I started collecting it right after your wedding. Something about him alarmed me from the very beginning." He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, printouts of bank statements, and various documents. In the photos, Randall was meeting with shady-looking people in equally shady places. "Have you been following him?" Megan felt a lump form in her throat. "All this time?" "I was protecting you." Harrison sat down on the edge of the table. 20 years in federal court taught me to see people for what they are. Randall started borrowing money before you were even married. His car dealership was already on the verge of bankruptcy. But, but he seemed so successful, Megan said, frantically leafing through the documents. He took out loans to cover other loans, a classic pyramid scheme. And then he started borrowing from people who don't sue if they don't get their money back. Harrison took out another folder. And this is the story of his first marriage, the one he didn't tell you about. Megan's head was spinning. She looked at the marriage certificate dated 8 years earlier, at the divorce certificate which stated divorce due to financial and moral abuse by the spouse. His first wife lost her home, all her savings, and almost went to prison because of the debts he saddled her with. Her father's voice sounded hollow. I found her. I talked to her. Her story is exactly like yours. At first he was the perfect husband, then came the debts, the drinking, the manipulation. Megan remembered how Randall always avoided talking about his past, how he skillfully changed the subject, how he explained the absence of relatives at their wedding by complicated family relationships. Why didn't you tell me before? Harrison sighed heavily. You were so in love. I hoped I was wrong that he would change with you. Besides, I had no direct evidence of illegal activity, only suspicions. I just watched and waited, ready to intervene at any moment. He took out another document. And this is a list of his current debts. It has the amounts, the names of the creditors, and the dates. Megan scanned the numbers and felt nausea rising in her throat. The total amount was astronomical. That's more than his entire former car dealership is worth, she whispered. Exactly. And you know what's most interesting? He borrowed most of that money after the business went bankrupt. It wasn't used to save the business. He gambled it away. Your husband is a gambler, Megan. A compulsive gambler with years of experience. Everything fell into place. His late nights, the calls from strangers, the constant requests for money. How he yelled at her when she refused to withdraw her last savings from her account. I was so blind. Megan hid her face in her hands. No. Her father sat down next to her and put his hand on her shoulder. You were in love. He knows how to charm people, how to gain their trust. His first wife didn't realize what she was dealing with at first either. And the necklace, could he really have sold it? He already tried. Harrison took out a photo. My people photographed him this morning near a pawn shop, but the owner is an old acquaintance of mine. He refused to take the jewelry. Megan looked at the photo. Randall at the entrance to the pawn shop, wearing the same stale t-shirt, holding her necklace in his hands. The man in the photo was a complete stranger. What happens now? She asked. That's up to you, her father said, putting the documents back in the folder. I can put pressure on him to return the necklace. I can help you with the divorce. I can make sure his debts become a criminal matter. It's up to you. Outside the office window, it was slowly getting dark. Megan looked at the family photos on the wall, her college graduation, her first award as a teacher, her wedding. In the last picture, she was beaming with happiness, and Randall was smiling his trademark charming smile. Now she could see how fake that smile was. I need to think, she finally said. Can I stay here for a few days? Of course. Your room is always ready for you. Returning to college proved unexpectedly difficult. Megan felt the curious glances of her colleagues. News travels fast in a small town, especially when it concerns the family of a former federal judge. She tried to act normal, checking papers and teaching classes, but everything seemed unreal, as if she were watching a movie about her life. Ashley was waiting for her in the faculty room. They had been friends since college and now taught art history together. Ashley put a cup of coffee in front of her and sat down next to her. You didn't answer your phone, her friend said, sounding concerned. My phone died, Megan lied, although she really just didn't want to talk to anyone. Come on. Ashley leaned closer. I saw Randall yesterday near the pawn shop. He was not in the best shape. Megan stirred her coffee without looking up. She didn't know how to explain to her friend what she herself had trouble understanding. "You know," Ashley began slowly, "when you first met him, I was thrilled, handsome, successful, charming, like something out of a novel. But then I started noticing little things. How he always tried to control the conversation. How he skillfully changed the subject when the conversation turned to his past. How he watched you closely at parties. Why didn't you ever say anything? Would you have listened? When I hinted that he was rushing things, you got offended and didn't talk to me for a week." Megan remembered that conversation. She had indeed been angry with her friend at the time. And then Randall had quietly begun to distance her from her old friends, always finding reasons not to go to get-togethers, saying they had different interests. Her phone vibrated, a call from Randall. Megan hesitated but answered anyway. "Baby," his voice sounded unusually soft. "I understand everything. I was wrong. Let's talk. I'll give you back the necklace, I promise. It's so hard for me. You know how much I love you. Without you, nothing makes sense." Ashley, hearing the familiar tone in his voice, decisively took the phone from her friend and hung up. "Classic manipulation," came a voice from the door. Standing there was Diana Foster, the literature teacher. "First aggression, then remorse, then playing on your pity. I've been through this." Diana sat down next to her. Megan had always admired her elegance and inner strength, but she had never known her story. "My first husband was very similar to your Randall," Diana said calmly, as if talking about something long past. "Successful, charming, did everything beautifully. And then the debts started, the hysterics, the accusations. He also tried to take my jewelry, saying he would sell it and give me the money right back, that I just had to hold on. You know what I realized later? It wasn't about the money. He needed to prove to himself that he could control me, that he could make me give up what was most precious to me." "How did you leave?" Megan asked quietly. "Not right away. At first I was ashamed to admit that I had made a mistake. Then I was afraid to start all over again. He would show up with flowers, apologize, promise to change. And I believed him, once, twice, 3 times, until I realized that the longer I stayed, the harder it would be to leave." Her phone vibrated again. A message from Randall. "I love you. I'll be lost without you. Is this really what you want?" Megan stared at the screen and saw his words for the first time for what they were. Not an expression of love, but an attempt to maintain control. She remembered how he had insidiously isolated her from her friends, how he had criticized her decisions, how he had made her doubt herself. "You know," Ashley put her hand on her shoulder, "you've always been strong. You just forgot that for a while." The teacher's lounge was quiet. Rain was falling outside. Students hurried along the paths between the buildings. Life went on as usual. Megan thought about her students, about how she taught them to see beauty in art, to understand the artist's intention. Maybe it was time to learn herself, to see the truth behind the beautiful facade, to understand the true motives behind people's actions. The phone rang again. This time, Megan simply turned it off. The evening was surprisingly quiet. Megan sat in her father's study trying to concentrate on preparing for tomorrow's classes, but her thoughts kept wandering. She was used to working to the sound of classical music, but here there was an almost ringing silence. Her father didn't like anything to distract him from his work. The doorbell rang unexpectedly sharply. Harrison, who was writing something at his desk, looked up from his papers. The housekeeper, Mrs. Parker, who had worked in the house since Megan was a child, hurried to the door. "Mr. Brightwood, there's—" Her exclamation was interrupted by a rough male voice. "Where's my wife?" Randall burst into the hall, reeking of alcohol. His usually neat clothes were rumpled, and the stubble on his face made him almost unrecognizable. Harrison rose from his desk. "Mrs. Parker, Please go upstairs." The housekeeper hurried away, casting a worried glance at Megan. She froze in the doorway of the library, clutching the folder with her notes tightly in her hands. "Megan!" Randall took a step toward her, but Harrison blocked his way. "Get out of my house." "Your house," Randall laughed hysterically. "And mine. The one you so generously gave me. Did you think you could buy me? I know you always thought I was unworthy of your precious daughter. You proved yourself unworthy." Harrison's voice remained calm, but there was a steely edge to it. "Randall, go away." Megan finally found her voice. "You're drunk." "Don't tell me." He turned sharply toward her. "You're just like him. You think you can control everything. I'll tell everyone what a perfect family you have. How Daddy Judge covered up your dirty little secrets, how—" His tirade was interrupted by the sound of cars pulling up. Through the large windows of the hall, 2 black SUVs could be seen entering the courtyard. "Here come your creditors." Harrison said the word with a hint of contempt. "I told them where to find you." Randall's face changed, and there was no trace of drunken aggression left. He turned pale and backed toward the door. "You don't understand. They're not who they say they are." His voice trembled. "Megan, baby, help me. I'll explain everything. Just give me some time." 4 burly men got out of the cars. Their suits couldn't hide their imposing physiques. One of them nodded greetings to Harrison. "Sergeant Morrison," Megan's father replied with a slight nod. "Glad you could make it." "Always happy to help, Your Honor," the man replied. "Mr. Preston, please come with us. We have a few questions about your financial transactions." "No, you can't. Megan!" Randall lunged toward his wife, but 2 men were already holding him by the arms. "It's all him. He set this up. You love me, remember?" Megan looked at her husband and didn't recognize him. Where was the confident man who had once won her heart? Before her stood a frightened, pathetic man, willing to do anything to avoid responsibility. "Please, no drama," Harrison said, as if dealing with a capricious child. "These gentlemen just want to talk to you. Just talk." "You'll be sorry." Randall jerked away from the men holding him. "I'll tell them everything. Everything." "Of course you will," Harrison replied calmly. "About the fake car documents, the shady deals, the money you borrowed against property that doesn't exist. You'll tell them everything." Randall went limp, as if the air had been sucked out of him. Megan saw fear flash across his face, his eyes darting around, looking for a way out. It was like a scene from a cheap movie, but it was happening in real life, in the elegant hall of his father's house. "I'll find a lawyer," he muttered. "You have no right." "We do," Sergeant Morrison interrupted. "We have a warrant. Let's go." Megan watched as her husband was led out of the house and into the car. He didn't resist, just muttered something under his breath. The second SUV remained at the gate, a silent reminder that the house was being watched. "Was that necessary?" she asked her father when the cars disappeared around the corner. "Yes." Harrison put his hand on her shoulder. "Otherwise, he wouldn't have stopped. People like him don't understand half measures." "Who are these people?" "The police. Financial crimes. I called an old friend when I saw Randall heading this way. They've been waiting for a reason to take him seriously." Megan nodded. She felt empty and strangely calm inside. She had thought it would hurt to see the man she loved fall, but all she felt was exhaustion and a strange sense of relief. "Mrs. Parker," Harrison called, "would you kindly bring us some tea in the library?" The evening grew quiet again. Only now the silence was not oppressive, but soothing. Megan sat down at the table and opened her folder with her notes. She had classes tomorrow and needed to prepare. Life went on. The morning began with a call from the police station. Harrison listened to the caller with an impassive expression, occasionally making notes in his notebook. Megan watched her father over her coffee cup, trying to understand what was going on from his reaction. "Randall was released on his own recognizance," Harrison said, putting down the phone. After talking to the detectives, he caused a scene at the station, shouting that he was being persecuted and trying to escape. They had to calm him down in a holding cell. Megan silently stirred sugar into her coffee. The spoon clinked softly against the porcelain sides of the cup, a sound from a past measured life when everything was simple and understandable. "The police have enough evidence for a serious investigation," her father continued, "but I can influence the situation, if you want me to." "What do you mean?" "There are two options." Harrison sat down opposite his daughter. "First, we let the investigation run its course. Given all of Randall's financial shenanigans, he's looking at serious time. The second, I use my connections to get the charges reduced, in exchange for a clean divorce and his complete disappearance from your life." Megan got up from the table and walked over to the window. Beyond the perfectly manicured lawn was the park where she had played as a child. Everything had seemed so simple back then, black and white, right and wrong. Now every decision was tinged with shades of gray. "What do you think?" she asked without turning around. "I think he deserves to be punished, but I also think that a long trial won't do you or the family's reputation any good." Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Ashley. "Saw Randall near the pawn shop on Maple Street. He looks terrible." Something twisted inside her. Maple Street was right next to the college. Megan imagined her husband wandering around familiar places, trying to sell her necklace. "I want to go to the pawn shop," she said firmly. "I'll send James with you." Harrison nodded toward the security guard who had been on duty at the house since last night. The Golden Crown pawn shop was located in an old brick building. The bell above the door jingled, and Megan was enveloped by a peculiar smell, a mixture of metal, dust, and other people's unfulfilled hopes. An elderly man with a magnifying glass in his hand stood behind the counter. He looked up at Megan as she entered and nodded knowingly. "Miss Brightwood, your father warned us you might drop by." He took a familiar velvet box from under the counter. "Your husband brought this piece of jewelry in twice. The first time, I refused to take it. The second time, he was more insistent, so I had to call security." Megan opened the box. The necklace lay on the worn velvet, intact and undamaged. She ran her finger over the familiar weave, remembering her mother's hands fastening the clasp. "How much did he ask for it?" "10,000. The pawnbroker shook his head. "It's worth 3 times that, but he was willing to give it away for next to nothing. People like that often do that. They need quick cash, no matter what the cost." Megan took out her wallet. "How much do I owe you for keeping it?" "Nothing." The man smiled gently. "I owe your father much more than the cost of a couple of days' storage." On the way home, Megan looked at the necklace lying in her palm. Every diamond, every curve of the gold weave held memories of the women in her family, her great-grandmother, her grandmother, her mother. Now it held her own story too, a story of mistakes and insights. At home, her father was waiting for her with divorce papers. They lay on the table in the library, a neat stack of documents capable of erasing 5 years of her life. "I spoke to Randall," Harrison said. "I explained the situation. He'll sign whatever's necessary in exchange for help with his case. He won't escape punishment entirely, but he'll get probation instead of jail time. And he'll move to another state. It turns out he has relatives there he never told us about." Megan sat down at the table and ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the documents. Somewhere here, between the lines of legal text, lay her future, uncertain, frightening, but no longer connected to the man she had once trusted with her life. "You know," she said, fastening the necklace around her neck, "when my mother gave me this, she said it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It's a symbol of the strength of the women in our family, their ability to make difficult decisions and move on." Harrison silently handed her the pen. Megan took it and paused for a moment. 5 years ago, she had signed another document, her marriage certificate. Back then, her hand had trembled with excitement and happiness. Now it was steady. The signature fell onto the paper, clear and confident. With that signature, Megan crossed out not only her marriage but also her naivety, her blindness, her willingness to believe beautiful lies. Somewhere deep inside, the pain of loss still ached, but she could no longer drown out the main thing, the feeling that she had made the right decision. Outside the window, a spring day was blossoming. Megan watched the sun play on the diamonds of her necklace, casting rainbow reflections on the wall. Each glint was like a small promise, a promise of a new life in which she would never again allow anyone to take away what was rightfully hers, not her jewelry, not her dignity, not herself. The courthouse always had a distinctive smell, a mixture of office paper, wood polish, and something elusively official. Megan remembered that smell from her childhood when her father sometimes took her to work with him. Back then, the corridors seemed endless, and the people in their formal suits looked like gods. Now she was walking down those corridors herself, her heels clicking on the marble floor, wearing a strict dark blue suit and carrying a folder of documents. Ashley insisted on going with her. Her friend waited on a bench while Megan submitted the documents to the office. The procedure turned out to be surprisingly mundane, no drama, just methodical filling out of forms and stamping. "Miss Brightwood?" The gray-haired woman behind the desk handed her a copy of the application. "Your case is scheduled for next week. Given the circumstances and the nature of the situation, the process will be expedited." Megan knew her father had taken care of it. He had contacted the right people and explained the situation. She felt a little uncomfortable using his influence, but he had insisted, "The sooner this charade is over, the better for everyone." Leaving the office, she sat down next to Ashley. Her friend silently handed her a bottle of water. She always knew what she needed, even when Megan didn't. "How are you?" Ashley asked when Megan took a few sips. "Strange. I feel empty inside, but it's a right kind of emptiness. Like in a classroom after the students have taken an important exam." Her phone vibrated in her bag. It was Randall. He had been calling every day since he received the preliminary documents. Sometimes he begged, sometimes he threatened, sometimes he tried to play on her pity. Megan had learned to just ignore his calls. A surprise awaited her at the college. Her colleagues had organized a small lunch in the staff room. Nothing special, sandwiches, fruitcake, a thermos of coffee. But the thoughtfulness touched her deeply. "We all go through things," said Diana Foster, pouring coffee into cups. "It's not what happens that matters. It's how you deal with it." "And how am I dealing with it?" Megan tried to smile. "With dignity." Diana handed her a cup. "You know, I've been watching you all these years. I saw how you gradually faded away next to him, how you lost your spark, and now it's coming back." After class, Megan went to a real estate agency. She decided it was time to look for a place of her own. Her father's house was a wonderful refuge, but she needed her own space. The real estate agent showed her several options, and she particularly liked one, a small apartment in an old house not far from the college, with high ceilings and large windows. "This would be a good place for an easel," she said, standing by the window. Ashley looked at her in surprise. "You want to paint again?" Megan nodded. She had given up painting after her wedding. Randall thought it was a waste of time. "You're an art teacher. Why do you need to paint yourself?" he would say. And she believed him, put away her paints, and locked her sketchbook in the closet. Over the weekend, she and Ashley went to an art supply store. The smell of oil paints, turpentine, and fresh canvas made her head spin. It had been so long. Megan bought everything she needed, spending more than she had planned, but for the first time in a long time, it was money she was spending on herself. That evening, her father called to tell her that Randall had signed all the papers. "He tried to bargain," her father said contemptuously, But he quickly realized he had no choice. Tomorrow he's leaving for Florida to stay with some cousin. He promised not to bother you anymore. Megan sat in her old room, arranging her new brushes and tubes of paint. On the table lay a sketch, her first in 5 years. It was nothing special, just a view from the window, but there was a freshness to it, as if she were seeing the world through new eyes. The necklace glinted on the dressing table. She now took it off at night and placed it carefully in a velvet box. It was no longer a symbol of loss or struggle, just a beautiful piece of jewelry with a history, of which she herself had become a part. Mrs. Parker knocked quietly on the door, bringing tea and homemade cookies, just like when she was a child. "Tomorrow, we'll do a thorough cleaning of your new apartment," she said. "I've already arranged for a cleaning service." Megan wanted to object that she could manage on her own, but stopped herself. Accepting help was also part of recovery, just like admitting that sometimes you can't do everything on your own, just like understanding that asking for support is not a sign of weakness. That night she had a strange dream. She was standing in front of a blank canvas, and the paints were laying themselves on it, creating a picture. When she woke up, she thought about the dream for a long time, then took out her sketchbook and started drawing. The result was a self-portrait, a little uncertain with a slight sadness in her eyes, but with a barely noticeable smile on her lips. It was like taking your first steps after a long illness, a little uncertain but getting stronger every day. They say that time heals, but Megan began to understand that it is not time that heals, but what you do with that time. How you fill the void, how you learn to trust again, first and foremost, yourself. The Atrium Private Art School was located in an old mansion with wide windows and spacious halls. Megan had been teaching there for 4 months. She was offered the position after a successful exhibition of student work at the college. The salary was higher and the classes were smaller, which allowed her to give more attention to each student. That day, she stayed late to help the seniors prepare for their final project. Sophie Chong, one of the most talented students, was working on a series of portraits in the style of the old masters, and Megan became engrossed in explaining the subtleties of light and shadow to her. Leaving school at dusk, she decided to stop by a small cafe around the corner. It was usually quiet there, and the coffee was excellent. The bell above the door rang melodiously. Megan ordered a latte and sat down by the window, taking out her tablet to look at the younger group's work. The bell rang, and out of the corner of her eye she caught a familiar movement. Randall. He didn't notice her right away either. He stopped at the counter, counting the change in his palm. His once expensive suit hung like a sack. His stubble had turned into an unkempt beard, and there was no trace of his former well-groomed appearance. Megan froze, but not out of fear or excitement, more out of surprise. She knew he had returned to town. Her father had said that things hadn't worked out for Randall in Florida, but she had hardly thought about him over the past few months. Randall turned around with a paper cup in his hands and finally saw her. Something flashed in his eyes, not recognition, not shame. He started toward her table but stopped halfway. "Hi," he said, his voice hoarse as if he had a cold. Megan nodded, not taking her eyes off her tablet. She smelled a mixture of unwashed body, cheap alcohol, and hopelessness. "I heard you're teaching at the Atrium now," he said, shifting from one foot to the other. "It's a good school, prestigious." "Yes," she finally looked up. "What do you want, Randall?" He sat down on the chair opposite her without waiting to be invited. His hands were shaking, spilling coffee. "I've been thinking about us, about how things could have been different, if you hadn't." "Don't," Megan shook her head. "Just don't. I have a plan." He leaned closer, and she involuntarily moved away. "I can fix everything. There's this one thing, a small investment, and—" "Randall," she began to gather her things. "Stop, you're doing it again." "No," You don't understand. This is a real chance. I know someone. Megan stood up. Other customers were already looking at them. The barista behind the counter discreetly reached for the phone, apparently preparing to call security. Goodbye, Randall. She headed for the exit. Wait! He jumped up, spilling the rest of his coffee. I've changed. Megan didn't turn around. She got into her car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, she saw him standing on the sidewalk, huddled against the drizzling rain, saying something silently. At home, she stood under the hot shower for a long time, as if washing away this chance encounter with the past. Then she threw on her favorite robe and settled into her study, a spacious room with her desk under a green lamp and an easel by the window. On the desk was a stack of documents, brochures for various professional development courses. The director of Atrium had offered her the opportunity to head a new program, art therapy for teenagers. This required additional education, and Megan was in the process of choosing a program. She picked up one of the brochures, but her thoughts returned to today's meeting. Not to Randall himself, but to how she felt. There was no pain, no anger, not even pity. Only a slight bewilderment, as if she had met a character from a long-read and forgotten book. The doorbell rang. Ashley had brought the promised books on art psychology. Her friend immediately noticed her mood. What's wrong? Megan told her about the meeting. Ashley shook her head. They say he's trying to pull some kind of scam again. He can't find any partners. His reputation is tarnished. That's none of my business anymore, Megan said, pouring tea into cups. I have my own life. They talked late into the night, discussing their new study plans, the latest exhibition at the City Gallery, and an upcoming trip to a conference in Chicago. Just ordinary conversations between ordinary people whose lives were going on as usual. Before going to bed, Megan checked her email and found an invitation to participate in a summer art program for gifted children. She had once dreamed of doing something like this, but Randall had always found reasons why it was a bad idea. Now, no one could stop her. She wrote a short reply agreeing to participate and closed her laptop. Outside, the city bustled at night, the center flashing with neon lights in the distance, and someone in the apartment next door was quietly playing the piano. It was an ordinary evening on an ordinary day, with no place for ghosts of the past. Sunday dinners at her father's house had become a new tradition for Megan. Mrs. Parker always cooked something special and set the table in the small dining room, which was cozier than the formal dining room. This time, her father's favorite dish, a steaming roast, was on the table. Harrison looked unusually relaxed in his home sweater. He slowly poured wine into the glasses, and Megan noticed how his gray hair had turned silver in recent months. "Your mother loved these Sunday dinners too," he said, unexpectedly, putting down the bottle. "She cooked them herself, though. She didn't trust anyone in her kitchen, not even Mrs. Parker." Megan looked at her father in surprise. He rarely spoke about her mother, as if it were too painful. But today, something had changed in his mood. "You know, I wasn't always so proper," Harrison smiled. "I did a lot of stupid things when I was young. Your mother got me out of a pretty dark place. You never told me. I didn't want you to know, but now is probably the right time." He took a sip of wine. "I started out as a lawyer in a small firm. I had a lot of ambition, but little experience. I got involved with people who offered me easy money to help them get around the law in a case. I almost agreed." Megan listened, forgetting about the cooling dinner. Her father had never talked about his past, only the bare facts of his life. "Your mother was working as a court clerk at the time. She found out about it somehow. She came to me, put a folder with evidence on the table, and said, 'Either you stop now, or I'll take this to the judge myself.' And you listened?" "Not right away. At first I was angry. How dare she tell me how to live my life? But she didn't back down. She said she saw something more in me than a corrupt lawyer. She was the only one who believed I could become who I am today." Harrison paused, staring out the window. "When you told me about Randall, I remembered myself back then. Just as cocky, thinking I could cheat the system. But your mother, she could see right through people, just like you." "I didn't see right through Randall," Megan said quietly. "Yes, you did. You just didn't want to admit it. That's from your mother, too. She always tried to find the good in people to give them a chance." They were silent for a moment. Mrs. Parker quietly cleared away the cold plates and brought dessert, apple pie, another greeting from the past. "You know what else your mother loved?" Harrison smiled. "Teaching. She gave free legal advice to the poor. She said knowledge should be available to everyone." "Yes, I remember. She would gather people at the community center on Saturdays. Nowadays she would do it online." Her father tapped his finger on the table. "By the way, I watched your college lectures. You're a lot like her. You have the same gift for explaining complicated things in simple terms." "You went to my lectures?" Megan looked at her father in surprise. "Recordings. Your principal sends them to me. You know, this could work on a larger scale. Everything is going online these days." They talked until evening. Her father told stories from his youth, not only about his mistakes, but also about his victories, about meeting her mother, about his first steps in his career. Megan felt like she was getting to know him all over again, not as a strict and successful judge, but as a man who had also been searching for his path, who had made mistakes, picked himself up, and moved on. As he was leaving, he stopped her at the door. "You know what life has taught me? Mistakes aren't the end. They're part of the journey. The important thing is to turn in the right direction at the right time." Megan hugged her father. They rarely allowed themselves such displays of emotion. But today was a special day. A day when the past helped her better understand the present. The idea of an online course wouldn't leave Megan's mind. She started simple. She drew up a plan for her first lectures, drawing on her teaching experience. But she quickly realized that speaking in front of a camera was not the same as teaching a class. Her first attempt at recording was a disaster. Megan set up the camera in her office, prepared her presentation, but as soon as she pressed record, she began to stumble and mix up her words. After 10 attempts to record the introduction, she called Ashley in despair. "You need a real cameraman," her friend said after watching the failed takes, "and lighting, and sound, and an editor. It's just an educational course, not a documentary. Any blogger can shoot better than that these days. I have a friend at the College Media Center, Mark Donovan. He can help." Mark turned out to be a short, bearded guy with an unhealthy habit of constantly clicking his pen. But when it came to work, he was transformed. He began to speak professionally and to the point. "You need to structure the material correctly," he explained, pacing around Megan's office. "Short segments, clear structure, visual elements, and most importantly, your personality. People should feel like they're talking to a real person, not listening to an audiobook." Work began in earnest. Megan rewrote her lectures, adapting them for the online format. Mark set up the equipment and taught her how to work in front of the camera. Ashley helped with the presentations. Diana Foster suggested including practical work for students in the course. Filming took place in the evenings when the school was quiet. Megan gradually got used to the camera and learned to speak more concisely without losing the depth of the material. Mark turned out to be a demanding director, making her reshoot takes until he got the result he wanted. "You need a pause here," he would say, "and smile here. Imagine you're talking to a real student." Editing took longer than the actual filming. Mark showed Megan the basics of working with the program, but mostly did everything himself, sometimes staying up late into the night. The first module of the course was posted on the educational platform 3 weeks later. Megan was nervous, checking her email every 5 minutes for feedback. The first comment came from a student in Seattle. "Finally, Someone has explained the difference between Baroque and Rococo in a way I understand. Thank you for the wonderful examples and clear explanations. Others followed. Students noted the accessibility of the explanations, the quality of the visual materials, and the pleasant manner of presentation. They especially liked the practical assignments Megan came up with for each topic. After reviewing the first reviews, the school director called her in. "This is an interesting project," he said. "We could integrate it into our program, give students access to the recordings for self-study, and of course, promote the course on external platforms." Megan did not expect such support. She thought she would have to prove the need for online learning, but the principal beat her to it. "Modern education must be flexible," he explained. "We can't ignore technology. Your course could be a pilot project." Work on the next modules went faster. Megan already felt more confident in front of the camera and had learned to structure the material more effectively. Mark implemented new technical solutions and experimented with formats. The number of subscribers grew. Among them were not only students, but also people from different professions who were interested in art. They created an online community where they discussed course topics, shared their impressions, and asked questions. Ashley looked at the statistics and whistled, "You're becoming an internet star." "What star?" Megan dismissed her. "I'm just doing my job in a new format." But inside, she felt satisfied. It was her own project, created from scratch, without anyone's guidance or pressure. She made her own decisions, chose the direction, and was responsible for the results. Her father, after watching a few lectures, just nodded. "Your mother would be proud of you. She always said that a real teacher finds a way to reach their students even if they have to invent something new." Time flew by as they edited the next module of the course. Mark showed Megan a new video editing program, sitting unusually close to her and explaining the meaning of each button. He smelled of coffee and some kind of spicy perfume. Megan caught herself listening not so much to his explanations as to the sound of his voice. A phone call interrupted the editing lesson. It was an unfamiliar number, but Megan answered, a teacher's habit of always being available. "Megan, this is Sarah Preston, Randall's sister." Megan moved away from the computer, feeling her shoulders tense. Mark, noticing the change in her mood, pretended to be completely absorbed in his work, but she saw his hand tremble on the computer mouse. "I know it's over between you two," Sarah's voice sounded tired. "But you need to know, Randall is in trouble. He got mixed up with some crooks and lost his last money. He's living in a motel on the outskirts of town. He's drinking. He's saying strange things." Megan was silent, staring at the monitor screen, where a frame from her lecture was frozen. There she was smiling, explaining something to her students. "He asked about you," Sarah continued, "about your father. It seems he has some plans." "Sarah," Megan finally found the words, "I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do." "I understand. Just be careful. And if you see him—" "I'll call the police," Megan said firmly. "I'll call the police right away." After the call, silence hung in the studio. Mark gently touched her shoulder. "Coffee?" They went down to the cafeteria, which was empty at this late hour. Mark brought 2 cups and some pastries. He remembered that Megan liked eclairs. "You know, I was married," he said unexpectedly, stirring his sugar. "Not for long. She was also a difficult person. I felt guilty for a long time, tried to help." Megan looked up. Mark was no longer clicking his pen, a sure sign he was serious. "And what did you do?" "I went to a psychologist. It turned out that my help was only preventing her from facing reality." The next day, Megan was sitting in the office of Dr. Helen Thornton, an elderly woman with piercing eyes and a soothing voice. "Why are you here?" the doctor asked after exchanging greetings. "I don't know if I should feel responsible," Megan said, telling her about the call, Sarah's words, and her doubts. "What do you really feel?" "Tired. I'm building a new life. I have an interesting job, projects. She paused, thinking of Mark, but continued, I don't want to go back to the past. Then why are you having doubts? Because he's in trouble. I could. What exactly could you do? Megan opened her mouth and closed it. What indeed? Give him money? Talk to him? Try to save a man who doesn't want to be saved? That evening, she recorded a new lecture. Mark was working on the lighting, clicking his pen out of habit. The light isn't right, he muttered, moving closer. Let's try. His hand accidentally touched her shoulder as he adjusted the collar of her blouse. Megan caught his gaze in the mirror. Mark was embarrassed and stepped back. Sorry, It's okay, she smiled. Let's try another take. At home, she wrote a short message to Sarah. I'm sorry about the situation with Randall, but I can't and don't want to get involved. Please don't call me about this again. After sending the message, she opened her laptop. She had to prepare materials for tomorrow's shoot. A message from Mark flashed on the screen. Want me to grab you some coffee tomorrow? Megan smiled. The past was in the past, and the present smelled like coffee, spicy perfume, and for some reason had a habit of clicking its pen when it was nervous. The letter from the University of North Carolina arrived on a typical workday. Megan was getting ready for a shoot when she saw an email from an unfamiliar address. The art history department was offering her an assistant professor position and the opportunity to develop her own educational program. Her online course had caught their attention, and they were looking for someone who could modernize their teaching system. Mark, noticing her pensive look, put down the camera. Something wrong. Megan silently handed him the tablet. He read, and she watched his face as his expression slowly changed from curiosity to understanding. This is an amazing opportunity, he finally said, but somehow too calmly. In the principal's office, the news was received with understanding. We can't compete with a university of that caliber, the principal shook his head. Although it will be a shame to lose you, but maybe we can continue our collaboration online. Her father listened to the news at dinner. North Carolina, he said thoughtfully. You know, I have some good friends there. It's a nice, quiet town. Good medical center. He paused, and Megan realized he was thinking about his age, about her being far away. I haven't decided yet, she said quickly. But you will, he smiled. I can see it in your eyes. It's the same look your mother had when she was about to do something important. Ashley reacted more emotionally. 4 hours on a plane. I'll fly out to see you on the weekends, and you can teach the course remotely. Everything's online these days. Megan nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Mark, who had become strangely quiet over the last few days. She thought about how they had stayed up late editing, how their accidental touches had become more frequent, how he had learned to read her mood from her small gestures. You should know, she told him after another shoot. I think I've made a decision. Mark sat at the editing console, clicking the pen as usual. I know, he replied without turning around. It's the right thing to do. You can't pass up an opportunity like this. But what about our project? We'll continue online. I can arrange remote editing, it's no problem, and I'll fly in for important shoots. They both knew they weren't just talking about work, something that hadn't happened yet, something that was just beginning to take shape, hung in the air. You know, Mark finally said, stopping clicking his pen, sometimes the right decisions aren't the easiest ones, but they're the right ones. Megan walked over to him and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. He covered her hand with his, and they stood there for a few seconds. I'm going to miss the sound of you clicking your pen, she said quietly, and I'll miss your habit of adjusting your glasses before every take. Megan wrote her reply to the university that same evening. It was clear, businesslike, with her consent and clarification of details. The new semester was starting in 2 months, enough time to finish her current projects and organize the move. At home, she stood at the window for a long time looking at the city at night. Somewhere out there in North Carolina, a new life, new opportunities, and new challenges awaited her. Her phone buzzed quietly. A message from Mark. "We're shooting the last module tomorrow. I'll bring your favorite coffee." Megan smiled. Sometimes the most important things remain unsaid, but that doesn't make them any less important, just like the decisions we make as we move forward. She started packing in her office. Megan methodically sorted through her cabinets, organizing the materials that had accumulated over the years. Some things went into boxes for the move, some into folders for the archives, and some into the recycling bin. Ashley helped, periodically distracted by particularly interesting finds. "Remember this project," she said, holding a folder with photos from her first student exhibition. "How nervous we were back then." Diana Foster stopped by after her last class. "I brought some boxes for books, and don't rush to throw away your old notes. Sometimes you find real treasures in them." At home, sorting through things went more slowly. Each item brought back memories, made her stop and think. Megan took a box of old albums out of the closet. She had taken them from her parents' house after her mother died. At the bottom of the box was a worn notebook with a brown cover. Her mother's handwriting, so familiar and dear to her, covered the pages in neat lines. It turned out to be a diary, not a personal one, but a teaching diary. Her mother had written down her thoughts about working with students, notes on teaching methods, and ideas for lessons. "Every student is a separate universe," she wrote. "Our job is not to squeeze them into a program, but to help them discover their own potential." Megan read, sitting on the floor among the boxes. Some of her mother's notes echoed her own thoughts about teaching. The same problems, the same search for solutions, the same joy at her students' successes. The doorbell rang. Mark had brought the latest edited course materials. He paused in the doorway, looking at the chaos around him. "Need some help?" They sorted through the boxes together. Mark methodically packed the books, pausing occasionally to read an interesting title. Megan told him about her mother and read excerpts from the diary she had found. "I have an idea," he said, closing another box. "Let's make a special edition of the course, about teaching art. We'll use your mom's notes as a basis. It'll be a passing of the torch." Meanwhile, the last classes of the school day were underway. The students knew about Megan's impending departure, and each lesson turned into a small event. They asked more questions and listened more attentively, as if trying to make up for what they hadn't learned before. In her last lecture, Megan talked about contemporary art. She spoke about how important it is not to be afraid of change, how each era brings something new, how tradition and innovation are intertwined. "Art teaches us to see beauty in change," she said, concluding her lecture. "Every new stage is not the end, but the beginning." They had a farewell party at their favorite cafe near the school. There was no formality or long speeches, just colleagues getting together. Diana brought her famous blueberry pie, Ashley organized the music, and the director gave a short but warm toast. Mark kept his distance, but Megan could feel his gaze. There were unspoken words and unfinished business between them. Maybe it was right to leave it at that, to keep that bright feeling of a new beginning without trying to turn it into something more. Megan packed the last box late at night. She put her mother's diary in her bag. It would go with her on the plane. On the table lay a flash drive from Mark with the full version of the course and a folder with contacts for remote work. The empty apartment seemed unfamiliar, echoing. Megan sat by the window looking at the city at night. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, was her old life, with all its mistakes and victories, losses and discoveries. And ahead of her lay a new life, unknown, but full of possibilities. Her phone buzzed in her bag. A message from Mark. "I checked the last module. Everything's ready. Good luck. And thanks for everything." The University of North Carolina campus greeted Megan on a cool autumn morning. Old red brick buildings covered in wild grapevines, paths strewn with colorful leaves, students with backpacks and tablets. Everything seemed unfamiliar and right at the same time. Her office was on the third floor of the Arts Building, a bright room with tall windows and good acoustics, which was especially important for recording online lectures. Megan was arranging books on the shelves when there was a knock at the door. "Professor Jameson, Department of Contemporary Art," said a tall woman with short hair. "Just call me Helen. I saw your course. Very interesting approach, especially the practical assignments." During her first week, Megan got to know all the faculty members. She was particularly pleased that her colleagues not only knew about her online project, but also used some of the materials in their own work. "We have a special recording studio," the technical director showed her. "The equipment is newer than at your previous school, and we have a team of specialists." Megan nodded, but inwardly grimaced. She was used to working with Mark, to his ability to grasp the essence of things in half a sentence. The new specialists were professional, but different. The first lecture went well. The students were curious and well-prepared, asking interesting questions. They were particularly interested in the idea of combining traditional teaching with an online format. "It's like the two hemispheres of the brain," Megan explained. "Each works in its own way, but together they create a complete picture." In the evenings, she furnished her new apartment, small but cozy, with a view of the university park. She unpacked books, hung pictures, and tried to get used to the new sounds outside her window. Her father arrived unannounced, simply appearing at the door with a suitcase and a bag of groceries. "I decided to see how you're settling in," he said, looking around the apartment, "and meet a couple of old friends." They walked around campus, and her father told stories from his youth. It turned out he had once studied here for a semester as an exchange student. Megan was surprised to find that she could talk to him as she never had before, openly, without holding anything back. "You know," he said at dinner, "I was afraid you'd leave because of the whole Randall thing, that you were just running away." "At first I was," Megan admitted, "but then I realized it wasn't running away. It was moving forward." Over the weekend, she recorded a new module for her course. The local experts were indeed professionals, although working with them was unusual. Her phone buzzed quietly. A message from Mark. "How's the new studio? I bet it's super modern." Megan smiled as she sent her reply. "Yes, but I miss the sound of your pen clicking." Gradually, life took on a new rhythm. Morning coffee at the university cafe, lectures, consultations with students, work on the online course. Evening walks around campus, conversations with colleagues, new ideas and projects. One evening, while unpacking the last boxes, Megan found an old necklace, the one that had started it all. She hadn't worn it in a long time. It seemed to belong to another life. But now, looking at the delicate weaving in the light of the desk lamp, she thought she could find a new use for it. The next day, she wore the necklace to class. Talking to her students about the evolution of styles in art, she spoke about the importance of staying connected to the past without letting it control the present. How every object, every story can take on new meaning in a new context. That evening, she wrote to Mark, "How about a special edition on the transformation of classic forms in contemporary art?" The reply came almost immediately. "I was just about to go on a business trip to your area. Shall we discuss it when we meet?" Megan looked out the window, where the campus lights were coming on in the twilight. A new city, a new job, new opportunities. And somewhere out there, in this new world, there was a place for everything. For an old necklace with a new story, for online courses with unfamiliar experts, for a father learning to let go, for Mark learning to find reasons to visit. Life went on, different from before, but definitely her own.